webinar, Hiring Secrets for Getting Great Developers on Your Team. My name is Michael Smith. I'm the CEO of TerraTech, and I will be talking about things to do to hire great developers and things to avoid, and sharing lots of tips and secrets and resources for doing that. So why don't we start off by looking at one of the issues that makes this hard. First of all, there's a big difference between the best programmers and the worst. A lot of studies have showed there's a 10-to-1 difference, and that means you really don't want to get the worst programmers on your team. And a survey I did last year showed that 17% of teams have incompetent staff on them. So, and that's just the ones being honest, because half the people in another survey I ran said that hiring good developers was their #1 challenge in ColdFusion programming development. So one of the things with bad programmers is they actually create more work than they contribute. They have more bugs in their code than good code, and they actually tick off the other team members, reduce team morale. So they can be costing you a lot. And bad hiring in general has a lot of costs. You have increased turnover. You've got to train all these people you hired that turned out not to be a good fit. You've got whatever direct hiring costs of advertising or recruiters and your staff time in interviewing, which turned out not to be a good hire. Then you also have to consider lost opportunity costs, projects you couldn't get done because you didn't have the staff in place to get the job done. And then also upsetting the team members you have, and maybe they end up leaving because you've got so many poor people on your team that are not pulling their weight. So I don't know exactly what numbers you have on these, but I think if you sat down and looked at the costs here, it would be in the tens of thousands of dollars realm. That's what my numbers when I looked at the costs involved in hiring bad people. So you really want to avoid doing that. Now, from my point of view, it's important that you're clear what your goals are in hiring. And these are some of the things I look for. You may have a different list, but whatever it is, I suggest you get clear what you're looking for in the developers that you hire. So the things I'm looking for are the developers smart? Are they intelligent? Can they solve problems? Do they get things done? Do they complete things? Do they come to closure on a task? Maybe there's several ways to do something, but they can't spend forever researching which the best way is. Just pick one, go for it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, modify or pick another way. And then I also look for a positive attitude and for passion with development and creating software. I find that makes a big difference to how well the team works and how well people work together with clients. So that for me is important. And then I also look for the ability to not only be able to write code and read code and communicate technically, but also able to explain these concepts in English, which is a completely different language from technical programming languages. And I've worked with developers who only understood SQL and C and other languages, but couldn't communicate the concepts in English. And it made for projects that were difficult to work with clients. So if you have any client interaction in your team, I would suggest encouraging looking for people who can communicate both in English and in tech. And for me, I'm looking for all 4 of these things. So it's no good if someone is smart, but they're unable to get things done. There are plenty of people in this world who are incredibly intelligent, could write a 30-page thesis on how you can have a Turing machine written in ColdFusion. Doesn't really help me if they can't get projects completed on schedule and get tasks done. And similarly, if they're good at getting things done but they're not smart, they're just going to get a bunch of dumb stuff done and not solve problems. So you need both those things. And then even if they're both smart and get things done, but they have a negative attitude, they're complaining, or they're not enthusiastic, I don't want them on the team. They're just going to destroy morale and not get things working together well. And then even if they have those three, but they can't communicate in English, they're going to have difficulty explaining requirements clearly to clients. So I look for all four of those things. If you miss out any of them, I think you're going to have a developer who's not going to be as good as they could be. And then the final point here is and I'm paraphrasing a different quote from Yoda from Star Wars. There's only hire or no hire. There is no maybe. So if you're interviewing and you have a gut feeling that there's something not right here, something doesn't add up, you just don't like them, that you don't think they're a good fit, even if you can't put your finger exactly on why, that's a no. Okay? There is no maybe, or maybe we should hire them for the company in another department, or perhaps they'll work out later, or my friend referred them, they must be good even though they seem to write bad code. Those are all no's. And personally, I don't think it's a good idea to have only one person interview. I think it's good that the people who are going to work together with the developer also are involved in the interview and do interviewing. And for me, any of those think it's a no or a maybe, then the decision is a no. It's so expensive to hire a bad fit or a bad developer that you really don't want to make a mistake there. It's better to say no to some people who might have worked out than to say yes to some that are going to be disasters. So those are the goals. I suggest you come up with what's important to you in hiring goals, but these are a great basis for that. And then here are some practices that I follow. First of all, often when you start hiring, you may have hundreds of people apply for the position. So there's no way you're going to interview hundreds of people for one position. You've got to do something to screen people down and screen out the people who aren't a fit. So thinking back to those goals of smart and communicates well and positive attitude and gets things done, you can start to look for clues to that as you look at their cover email, you look at their resume, maybe you check out their social media, do a Google search on them, you look at what they've done on Git, and you eventually, what I do after an interview is give them a practical coding test to see, can they actually code, and what does their code look like, and how well do they work with others. So these are going down, in how many people have been screened out. I mean, first of all, I look at the cover email. If it's not laid out well or it's not easy to read, I know they have issues communicating in English, so they go out immediately. Then I'll look at their resume, and I'm looking to how it's what experience they've had, what roles they've had, and how well it's laid out, and how many, how well is it being condensed down. If the resume is over a page or two, I'm wondering how good are they going to be able to do things concisely. And then I might look at social media to see what they contribute there. Do they have a blog? Do they have any open source projects? And so forth. And then also, I look during the whole interaction before the interview, I look, does the candidate do what they say they would do when they said they were going to do it? Or if something unexpected comes up, do they renegotiate ahead of time? Because to be honest, if they're not able to have integrity during the selection process, how can I expect them to have integrity when they're working in the team? So to me, I look out for signs of integrity and clear communication there. The other thing on hiring tips is to consider what route you're going to hire and what the costs and time involved here are. So at the low end of cost is if you have contacts in your LinkedIn or friends you know or people on the team that someone knows who might be a good fit for the position. Then you didn't have to advertise, you didn't have to pay a recruiter, and you didn't have to spend much time on that. So that's the easiest route to hiring a good person. And if you've got a personal recommendation from someone on your team or you've seen the person's work before, then there's a good chance that they would be good and they're definitely worth interviewing. Second level of cost and effort is placing ads, either in Monster or on lists specialized like on the one on House of Fusion for ColdFusion ads. And then the highest cost is paying a recruiter, where you're paying, maybe 20% of the person's first year salary to the recruiter, but they're doing the searching and to find candidates, and they're probably doing proactive outreach to reach out to people who might be a good fit. If you do go the ad route, a very common technique to filter out people who pay attention is to put an Easter egg into the job ad. And that's where you put something at the bottom of the ad and it says something like, well, include your favorite color here, or tell me what year you started programming in ColdFusion, or put 3 letter X's together in your reply, or put a certain subject line in your reply. It's something specific that the candidate needs to do in their cover email. And you'd be amazed. More than half the people who respond to ads do not read these things or don't follow the directions exactly. And again, if a candidate can't follow directions during the interview process, it's highly unlikely they're going to follow directions in a project later on. So I always use those to screen people out who are incapable of following directions. And then if you're going the internal route, this means that you need to have a network of potential candidates. So you want to reach out to people, connect to them on LinkedIn, check out their blogs, maybe comment on them if you think they look interesting, and tell them, hey, I don't have a position open right now, but I know I will do in the future, and is it okay to keep in contact with you? So always be making a network of people who you could reach out to, and then when you have a position available, you can reach out to your network and say, hey, I've got this position, is this something you'd be interested in? And that is a lot better than scrambling around having to place an ad and then waiting for several weeks for all the responses and filtering to be done. The other thing I will say about interviewing is that it's important to listen to what is not said. Often people talk about things, but then they don't mention something that would be important, and that can be as important as what they do say. And be careful about making assumptions. You might assume someone has certain skills, but you don't check in on it, or you might assume that they can start next week when really they have to give a month's notice. Always good to question everything that you need to know about. And if you have a difficult question to ask, the pregnant pause gets more information than filling in the space. So ask the question, then shut up and let the other person fill in the space and see what they say. So we talked a bit about some of the tangible things, but I think often intangibles are more important. So I'm looking more at how someone thinks than their work history. I'm looking more at the experience they have and the skills they have than their education. I'm looking at their attitude, and I'm figuring out, are they a cultural fit for the culture we have in this company? So those are all intangible things. And a list of languages someone's got on their resume, well, it's of some interest, but it's not as important to me as the intangibles. And the intangibles are harder to find out. So That's what I tend to focus on more in the interview process. So before you hire, I think it's important that you do some preparation. Um, so do you have a job rec? Do you have something that says, here are the minimum requirements we have for this position? They need to have this skills in ColdFusion or SQL or other skills. And are there some skills that are be nice to have but aren't the minimum? And then do you have a job box? Do you have a list of what the person is responsible for, what they need permission for to do, and what is not in their area of responsibility? What team are they going to be in, and who will they report to? Do you have a budget to hire them with? If you're hiring in an office situation, do you have a physical space set up and ready to go so that they can start immediately? Or is there someone else you have to tell to get that ready? If you're hiring them virtually, do you have all the software and tools set up ready to go to add them immediately that you hire them? So a little bit of preparation helps the hiring process go much more smoothly. And then when you get to the interviewing and you've screened out candidates and you decide, yes, these would be good to interview, and I suggest you have the whole team interview them so that you get different information and feedback, because it's not just you that has to work with them, other developers will need to work with them. So are the interviewers prepared? Have they looked at the resumes, written down any questions, made some notes? Are they relaxed and friendly about the interview process? Do they know they need to take notes and make sure that they listen carefully? They're not just nervous themselves on asking questions, because often people who haven't done interviewing find it a bit stressful, and even people who are experienced with interviewing can find it a bit stressful. So it can be easy to forget to listen. So interview structure. Plan out what your structure is. Pick a location that's going to be quiet. I find it's best not to have a barrier between you and the candidate, so don't sit at your desk and they're on the other side. It creates a psychological barrier. Both sit on at a table where you're both next to each other. And that's true for other kinds of meetings too. You want to have the setup be consistent for all the candidates, and give candidates time to ask questions. You may have other things you want to have in your interview structure, but thinking about it ahead of time will definitely help with that. So what about interview schedule? Here's a sample schedule for an hour-long interview. Start off with introductions to put people at ease. Tell them how long the interview is going to be, who they're going to meet afterwards. Maybe make sure they've had something to drink, or if they need to go to the bathroom, they know where that is. And then ask them structured questions that you've got listed down. Checking on their experience for the job. Follow up on any information you need to clarify. Perhaps there's some answers they gave that you weren't clear on, or maybe there's something in their resume that's not clear. Give them time for their questions, and then wrap up by telling them what the next steps are, and who if they are having another interview with someone else, take them over to that person. So I mentioned interview questions. You want questions that you've written down ahead of time and thought through, so you can ask the same questions to all the candidates. And it's better to have open-ended questions rather than closed questions that are just yes or no. And problem-solving questions are great for finding out how smart people are and how good they are at getting things to closure. You want to avoid questions that lead them. I mean, think of an attorney at a trial where they're not supposed to lead the witness. You don't want to lead the candidate by saying, well, I don't suppose you know SQL Server or whatever. You want to ask them an open-ended question on that. And I would put all the questions into a document, print them out with plenty of space where people can fill in the gaps with their notes. And then after the interview on the form, I would have a hire, no hire area, and make that decision straight after the interview while it's all fresh in your mind and you're clear on what you feel about the candidate. And just to reiterate, there is no maybe. It's either hire or no hire. If you're in any way unsure that this person could be a good fit, or you have something that you're uneasy about, it's a no hire. Far better to not have bad team members come in than to reject some people who might have been a good fit. So what things do you want to ask in a developer interview? And these are some ideas from Joel Splowski, and I'll give the link to his blog post on this in the resources at the end. So start off introducing the person, and then maybe get them in ease, asking them about recent projects they've done, so they can talk about something they're sure about. And then a common technique to see how smart someone is to ask them an impossible question. So you may have heard about these. These were made famous in Microsoft interviewing. They're things like, well, tell me how many gas stations there are in Los Angeles. And this is without access to Google. This is like, do some thinking to say, okay, well, this is how many people I think live in Los Angeles, and this is how many cars there are, and this is how often a car needs to get gas, and this is how long the gas lines are. And deduce down, okay, making assumptions, how can I figure this out? And you want to see, are they capable of solving a problem where they really don't have enough information and they have to make assumptions on it, and do some back of the envelope thinking, and maybe think out of the box a bit. So a good candidate will be able to come up with some kind of answer and justify it. And it doesn't matter what answer they come up with, it's the thought process that they go through to get to the answer that matters. A bad candidate will have no idea to get started, will need a lot of help along the way and prompting, and will be anxious about solving the problem. So not a good fit. And then maybe give them a design question, like I'd like you to design a vehicle for me, and give them a whiteboard and a pen and see what they come up with, and then see if they are asking questions, like just like when you're designing a program, maybe they draw a picture of a car, and then you're like, oh, I forgot to tell you, this vehicle needs to be able to cut grass. Oh, they've made an assumption that it was a car. Okay. So see if they're good at asking questions to narrow things down and to get rid of assumptions. Because often when clients have software to be written, there are all kinds of assumptions being made that need to be brought to light. And then at some point in the interview process, if they say something that is obviously true, you can challenge them and play devil's advocate and see if they stand up for their beliefs, or whether they flip-flop and fold immediately when challenged. So you can see how strong they will hold to something. And then see if they have any questions. And don't forget to sell your company too, because that's part of the interview process. It's an exchange where you're seeing if there's a good fit between your company and the candidate wants to see if there's a good fit between them and your company. And when you're selling the company, you're really selling yourself, and you're selling your enthusiasm. So that is important in that regard. Sometimes organizations require committee interviews. To be honest, I really don't like committee interviews. I think candidates find them very intimidating. It feels like they're on trial. There's only one candidate, and there's like 4 or 5 people interviewing them, throwing questions at them. Not ideal in my view. I'd rather have sequential interviews. But if you do need to do committee interviews, it's very important, more so than a one-on-one interview, that you help the candidate relax. And it's not, the idea is not to grill them here. It's even though you do need to ask tough questions, it's to find out, is there a good fit, and to share information. And then if you do a committee interview, please make sure everyone has a copy of the resume and the job requirement and the minimums, and has had time before the interview to have read it. It's really not good if the candidate gets in there and people are only just reading the resume as they come in there, or they haven't read it at all. So those, if you do deal with committee interviews, those are some tips on that. And then I'm sure your HR department will encourage you to keep records. There are important legal reasons for this, I'll mention in a moment. But you might want to have a folder that you keep all the resumes and all documentation and notes and other forms in, and keep it organized. So here are some do's, and I'll mention some don'ts on interviewing. So you've got a set of questions you're going to ask people. You want to be familiar with them. You want to have read the resume ahead of time and made notes on it. It's important all the candidates ask the same questions, otherwise you're going to get a distorted picture and maybe miss out on key information that you might not have realized. And always good to, if you're unclear about something, clarify, ask follow-up, get specifics. Focus on what people can do rather than what they can't do. And be prepared to listen more than you talk. It's very easy when asking people questions to be thinking about the next question you want to ask them, or the question after that, or what's for lunch. You really need to listen and focus on them. And that's both to get information and to give them a positive viewpoint of the interview. There's nothing more discouraging. You come into a job interview, you're interested in it, and the person doesn't seem interested. And then interviewing is tiring, so take a break. Don't schedule all your interviews back to back with no breaks. Get a break between interviews, make some extra notes on the candidate, take a walk outside, get some fresh air, and so you can be fresh for the next candidate. So here are some don'ts. Don't want to use a recording device. That might be an issue if you end up with a lawsuit with someone claiming discrimination. Something I've seen in some interview situations is where people give them a real problem that the company has and use the candidate as a free consultant. I think that's unethical, and it's not a good interview technique. Be aware of what you write down on interview notes, because there have been cases in lawsuits where interview notes have been subpoenaed. And if you say things that you wouldn't want printed on the front page of your local newspaper, you could get into trouble there. So just be careful what you write down. You don't want to put anything defamatory or racist or sexist or any other things of that nature there. And also during the interview, you don't want to let the candidate take charge of that. Keep the interview on track with your set of questions. I mean, it's great if the candidate shows initiative and leadership, but not to the point where they take over the interview. Now, I mentioned some things with lawsuits. Here are some ways to get sued during the interview process. So asking questions either directly or indirectly about any of these things will get you into trouble. So asking about the candidate's age, their arrest record, where they're from, what languages they speak, citizenship, race, what religion they are, whether they're married, whether they have a family or kids, whether they're divorced, what their health is. All of these are a no-no. So avoid asking about those, or even hinting about those. Don't ask someone, oh well, what were you doing on Thanksgiving, or something to elucidate what their family status is. And those are all legal things in most states in the United States. So And you really don't want to get sued on this. It would waste a lot of time and money. And there's no need to ask these things anyway, because what relevance do they have to how good a programmer someone is? So I mentioned earlier the job box. I'm just going to go into that in a bit more detail because you may not have come across that before. So the idea of the job box for a candidate, and this is something you'd work with them once they're hired, but it's a very good idea to prepare this before you start the interviewing, is it's what things are they allowed to do without approval. Maybe that's developing new programs, maybe it's testing. What things do they need to get approval on? Maybe database design has to be approved by someone else. And then what things are just not inside their job requirements, someone else is supposed to do them. And by having a clear job box, it stops people being confused about doing stuff that's really someone else's responsibility, and also being clear where they have the authority to take decisions themselves. So I found that useful. And here's part of a job box that I have. They're supposed to work with clients, and they have various development things they're responsible for. But they also have some limitations on what tasks they get to work on and what schedule they do them under. So that's an example of part of a developer's job box I've used. So you might get some ideas from that for your own staff. And then before we get to the Q&A, what do you do if you have bad developers? So if you're able to, I would fire them. To be honest, they just demoralize the team and they create more work than you need. You may have office politics and organization that makes it hard to fire people. You may need to document their deficiencies thoroughly before you fire them. If they're employees, you may need to document and go through a disciplinary process. And put things in writing to say, okay, these are the things you're not doing that you need to do, and this is the consequences if you don't do them. They may need to go through 2 or 3 iterations of that before you feel you've got enough documentation to fire them. And you don't want to make firing you want to make it as a pleasant experience for both you and them as you can. So by putting them on notice and starting to give them resources to look for jobs somewhere else, maybe even giving them time to start looking for other jobs before you fire them, you make it far less likely that you end up getting sued. The situations where people get sued for incorrect dismissal, generally the person felt they were surprised by the firing, and they felt there was something not right about it. It wasn't fair. They were being fired because of their color or sex or age or some other thing, nothing to do with their performance. So if you make it super clear that it's their performance that is the issue, and none of those other factors should be a reason for firing someone, then that makes it go easier. If you can't fire them and you're in a large organization, at least you can keep them off your team. If you can't keep them off your team, keep them away from important tasks, particularly tasks that affect other developers. So for example, you might not have them develop code, maybe you have them documenting or testing or doing something else that's not going to screw up someone else's code. If they are working on code, you do want to have source control in place. And I would say that in any event, even if all your developers are great, having source control there, if one person makes a change, it means someone else can easily find out what changes they've made if something's going wrong. So those are my suggestions if you have bad developers, how to deal with them. And then if you've got a team of great developers, it's important to keep them together. Because people get to know what people's strengths are and they like working with them, and the team just works better the longer it can be kept together. So if possible, when you've had a successful team working together, see if you can keep that team or the core of the team together for future projects. So I mentioned some resources. First two are cheat sheets for interviewees and interviewers. So that may surprise you. We give out a cheat sheet to the candidates being interviewed, the interviewees, and that tells them how to prepare for the interview, what to do during the interview, and how to follow up successfully. And I found that's been a distinguishing feature and being useful to make a better interview. Because really, you're just trying to find out, is there a good fit here? And you might as well help the candidate do the best they can. And then a cheat sheet for interviewers on how to deal successfully with an interview. So both of those are free PDFs that you can get from those URLs. And then I mentioned earlier Joe Splotsky's, he wrote a great blog post called Guerrilla Interviewing, and he has some great tips in there, some of which I've mentioned, and I'd recommend reading that. He's a very good interviewer and has hired lots of great developers. So that's all of the resources. So if you have any questions, I opened up a question window, and I don't see any questions there right now. So feel free to email me, michael@terratech.com, if you have any hiring or interview questions, or if you have any feedback or other suggestions on what would make for a good interview, or what tips you have for hiring developers. And just double check there aren't any other questions in there. I'm not seeing them. So thanks so much for coming, and good luck in your hiring, and may all the developers you hire be excellent developers, and may all the bad developers leave your teams immediately, and you progress to wonderful software. Have a wonderful rest of your day.